Welcome back, everyone. Sage Man here. This episode of the TAPAS and Stuff Productions podcast brought to you by my supporter on Patreon. My supporter, singular, just got the one. It's Stacy. She's a $1 patron of mine, and I'm a $2 patron of hers. Plus, I commission her for lots of stuff, so it's really her who profits from the thing, innit? And after 16 months on the site, we're still each other's only patrons, so all the exclusive content she posts there is just, for the time being, just for me, and I don't really have any content to show her in return. I'm gonna start posting, like, scripts and story reels and stuff, but haven't really finished any of those yet, and I can't post a script until after that script's project is finished, because that would be spoilers, but, it'll all come around. Then I'll have those. Maybe audio commentaries too, some making of documentaries. Hey, they say to start a Patreon well before you're actually ready for one. Better to have it than not for whenever we suddenly and unexpectedly get big. Stacy's YouTube channel is much bigger than mine, over 50 subscribers. That's way more than I've got, despite her much smaller amount of videos and series. Plus, she's got all those cool little end title thingies on all her videos that tell you where to find more Stacy content. I don't know how to do one of those. My plan for the longest time was to move to Quincy in early June. It is mid-October. Still haven't found a place there, nor do I know how I'm gonna get there when I do find a place. I don't think 2020 was quite my year the way I hoped it would be. I know 2020 hasn't gone the way anybody planned, but how many people said 2020 is going to be my year? I actually said that. Still, marching through. I'll go to Quincy, and then we'll start up some awesome projects. Maybe even totally awesome projects. That's what TAPAS stands for. For some context that I didn't provide last podcast, my mom wanted me to visit her this summer. So, back in July, I did so. Came here, and she and I and my sisters, we went on a road trip to San Diego. But then I never ended up going back to Wisconsin. I'm still at my mom's place in Colorado. We're looking into where I go from here. Starting with, kind of getting into shape, more accustomed to walking and exercising, getting my affairs in order, and just not being so depressed all the time. I think forcing myself at gunpoint to get back into my old content creation habits is a good ingredient for that. So let's open with some talking about Keys and Kingdoms. The building of the world is going poorly, just awful. It's a terrible, stupid, badly developed world and needs to be completely rebuilt. It needs to stop just being a Dungeons & Dragons world with a couple of cool homebrew races. There's absolutely no Disney feel in it, even though I've been pouring through these films. So, yeah, new rule, no Dungeons & Dragons content in Keys and Kingdoms. Not none, but we're not using the open game license, at least not in terms of rules and magic system. Monsters, yes, because Disney films don't have a shit ton of monsters. We're going to need some for a gaming world, but other than that, I'm just, scrapping all my assumptions that I would be using the 5th edition open game license and just, try to build the world from the bottom up with all the notes I've taken on these Disney films thus far. As for the choices, our first Keys and Kingdoms story, I'm pulling back on that. I've ceased writing the episodes because first, the entire world, the very fabric of its reality, needs to be overhauled. I've been angry about not being able to figure out how, but I'm working on it. I'm going through everything I've written down so far and figuring it out. We're going to finish the pilot. Pilots always have continuity errors after all, but we're holding back on what comes after. One thing I've recently discovered is Core, an open alpha project that allows for the creation of video games. I had a thought I've thunk before, that the way to figure out the K&K world might be to start off with a video game. Of course, making a video game isn't an easy task by any stretch of the imagination, no matter how user-friendly a game engine creating thingy you make. But I have to believe I can learn how, because I'm sure as heck never going to find anyone who's going to help me. People spend their spare time on their passion projects, but every every person that has a great skill is, also a good enough writer. No one's going to do coding and animation for a passion project somebody else wrote. Today's films are The Nightmare Before Christmas. Oy, oh boy, have I been eagerly awaiting covering this one. And then Disney's adaptation of The Three Musketeers that they made the same year, which I've never seen, but sorta kinda always wanted to. I've always been vaguely aware of it, so exciting episode coming up. Let's start with Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas. Not quite so justifiably called. Tim Burton did not make this film. He was a producer, of course, and he wrote and illustrated the short story that inspired the film. But outside of early development, he was too busy working on some Batman-related tasks to actually make this film. Instead, it was written by frequent Burton collaborators Michael McDowell and Caroline Thompson, and directed by stop-motion animation legend Henry Selick. Due to its macabre nature and un-Disney-esque art style, when this film was released in 1993, it was released as a Touchstone film, and so it remained for the first 10 years or so of its life, at least in the US. You see, in foreign countries, or at least a couple of East Asian countries I'm aware of, they didn't bother with the Touchstone thing and just released this as a Disney film, and a very beloved Disney classic did it become. In China and Korea and Japan, whilst largely forgotten elsewhere. Enter the first Kingdom Hearts game. The Japanese game developers thought nothing of including The Nightmare Before Christmas in the game's lineup of classic Disney worlds. Then once the game returned to America, Nightmare saw an explosion of popularity that made Disney realize it was worthy of admitting they were responsible. Future home releases of Nightmare were thus branded with the Disney logo instead of the Touchstone one, the only time as far as I'm aware that that's ever happened. So let's start our film. Isn't it weird that Disney released two iconic Halloween movies in '93? What's up with that? Anyway, we open on some rhyming narration from, I think that's Ed Ivory, the actor playing Santa Claus in this film. I don't think Ivory is known for anything else. Burton wanted Vincent Price for the role of Santa, but Price was very old and eventually died the same year the film was released. On the soundtrack, this narration is extended and is performed by Patrick Stewart. How sweet is that? People like to debate about whether this is a Halloween movie or a Christmas movie. Henry Selick falls on the Halloween side of the debate, and despite Christmas being in the title, it's a movie about Halloween trying to experience something different. Trust the director. Me, I found my side on the debate when I was in the second grade. It's a Thanksgiving movie, because Thanksgiving comes right between Halloween and Christmas. Not a very popular hot take. People have been glaring daggers at me over it for 20 years now. As we see in this film, holidays come from interdimensional towns whose inhabitants devote themselves all year to bringing that holiday to Earth when their day comes. I don't want to think too hard about the K&K implications. I want to start the movie. You know how much I want to start the movie? I was scheduling the podcast once, and I was delighted to realize that if I kept to the schedule I was on, I'd be watching The Nightmare Before Christmas and releasing a podcast episode about it on Halloween 2019. It is mid-October 2020. That Halloween was over 11 months ago. Talk about your schedule slippage. And not my worst schedule slippage ever. I promised that I'd return to writing my My Little Pony fanfic in the year 2020, but I was on such a roll with my Disney Princess fanfic that I decided not to make the switch until next year. Yeah, I'm a 28-year-old man who writes fanfiction about My Little Pony and Disney princesses. Fuck you, I'm an artist. So this is pretty close to being a comparable schedule slip. It's been very close to a year. We enter Halloween Town and get our opening number. This film's Danny Elfman penned soundtrack is super fucking iconic. This film is way more of a musical than most animated films. You ever notice? There are no less than 11 musical numbers packed into this film's scant 78 minutes. Granted, that's not half as many songs as you're likely to hear in a live-action musical, but it's way more than most animated musicals. The music is a big enough element in the film, and so much of the music is used specifically to give us the thoughts of our protagonist, Jack Skellington, that the end credits list his singing voice, Elfman himself, before his speaking voice, Chris Sarandon. Our opener, however, is This Is Halloween, in which Jack doesn't participate. Instead, we get a pretty good look at the various denizens of Halloween Town. Every one of them has a unique design and story, and they bring Halloween Town to life throughout the entire film. A small repertoire of voice actors play this population, among them Elfman playing the screechy-voiced clown, improv comedian Greg Proops playing a good portion of the more memorable personalities, and Carmen Twiley, who would later go on to sing lead vocals on The Circle of Life in The Lion King, as some minor roles such as the lagoon creature, identified in the credits as the Undersea Gal. These background characters, not background, but incidentals, they were not designed by Burton. He only took care of the main ones, while a different crew provided the more minor population. A crew that included Joe Ranft and were clearly a bunch of deranged maniacs, as a lot of the denizens of the town actually look pretty disturbing. Well, you know the routine by now, I'm sure. Every one of them ought to be the inspiration for some kind of K&K monster. I'll jot down the specifics at a future date. As the number ends, we meet Jack Skellington, the Pumpkin King, the man responsible for organizing terrifying evenings for mortals every Halloween. Jack appears as a skeleton in a neat pinstriped suit and is, by a huge margin, the tallest character in the film. You ever notice that? How he towers over everyone else? I've thought before about how I would represent Jack, as he does appear in Kingdom Hearts, and this whole thing started as a Kingdom Hearts parody. I figure in the Kingdom Butts universe, Jack is identified as the White Lich of the Curly Hill. A lich because, well, he's a skeleton, and in Kingdom Hearts he's a spellcasting character, which incidentally goes against Burton's vision. One of the rules Burton left behind for the film before he had to focus his attention elsewhere was that there is no magic in Halloween Town. Regardless, I call Jack a White Lich because, well, as a skeletal mage, he's basically a lich, and white referring to, not a bad guy. When pondering converting Kingdom Hearts characters to D&D classes for writing the parody, I figured Jack to be a sorcerer. Just seemed like his magic was inherent in his bones, not learned. Then I saw that in 5th edition, liches have to be wizards. They can't be sorcerers. Which I was okay with. Jack does seem like the scholarly type. He does a lot of research in the film and likes science. But now I'm not following 5th edition rules anymore, so in K&K, sorcerers can be liches too. I don't want to create a world that couldn't create a character such as Zycon, the arch-villain of the Order of the Stick, who is, guess what, a sorcerer lich. First thing in the film, once the first number is over, we meet Sally, played by Catherine O'Hara, a living rag doll who is the creation of Dr. Finkelstein, played by William Hickey, Halloween Town's resident evil scientist. In fact, the credits list him as Evil Scientist instead of by his name. His name isn't mentioned often in the film either, to the point that only upon this viewing did I realize it's Finkelstein, not Finkelstein, which I just said. I'm probably going to forget that fact at some point before the end of this script. It's Finkelstein, because Frankenstein. Now that Halloween is over, Jack goes for a little walk through the cemetery, summoning his ghost dog Zero as he does so, and allowing Sally to partake in some stalkingness. And he sings Jack's Lament. Like I said, 11 songs in this film, and every one a multiple replayable banger. So Jack is suffering some ennui. He's been in charge of Halloween for who even knows how long, and he's tired of doing the same thing every year. He wants something new, but he has absolutely no idea what else is out there. Most of this song is performed on the crest of the Curly Hill, the film's iconic spiraling landmark that uncurls when it's time for Jack to descend it. So good. So good. Jack wanders off aimlessly into the forests outside Halloween Town. Next morning, the mayor, played by Glenn Shaddix, goes to Jack's house to start working on next Halloween. Oi, Halloween was yesterday. Take a break, people. And is disturbed to find him not there. I do have to wonder as to the true nature of characters such as the mayor and Dr. Finkelstein. I've had to give them some thought already as they appear in Kingdom Hearts. They're clearly not human, you know. The mayor has a reversible face, and the doc has hinges on his skull that allow him to quite literally pick his own brain. And I think I found a pretty cool answer. The answer? Shadar Kai. I don't know how far back into D&D history you have to go to find the first appearance of Shadar Kai, but I first discovered them in 4th edition. Maybe that's when they debuted. I don't know. Anyway, in 4th edition, the Shadar Kai are descended from humans who found themselves in the Shadowfell and became servants of the Raven Queen, goddess of death, and their descendants live in the Shadowfell to this day. In 5th edition, they're pretty much the same, except elves instead of humans. Interesting creative decision. Anywho, I read once in a rather obscure 4th edition expansion pack that included a section on Shadar Kai that they're very passionate people. You see, in the darkness and gloom of the Shadowfell, it's very easy to succumb to despair and depression. The Shadar Kai fight this off by being passionate and extreme. Now, I can't remember how much this was actually in the book and how much was my personal interpretation, but bear with me. What I picture is that the Shadar Kai are not only into extreme sports and death-defying risks and other 90s things to keep their adrenaline up, but also like tattoos and piercings and ritual scarification and other body modifications that heckin' hurt. Yeah! So maybe Keys and Kingdom's equivalent of the Shadar Kai, presumably name changed. I think a name as distinctive as Shadar Kai would be a D&D trademark. Basically the more human-type people of Halloween Town who've just made extreme modifications. The brain hinge, the twistable face. That's my idea. It occurs to me that I haven't actually read the part in the 5th edition expansion creature book about what their Shadar Kai are like. Apparently, I just assumed that they're pretty much the same as in the 4E version. It's on my agenda, gonna read about them, just haven't found the time. Ah, heckin' what? The sun in Halloween Town's dimension is a jack-o'-lantern. How did I never notice that before? I must have. I probably just forgot. So yeah, Jack's been walking all night, just wandering aimlessly until he's found himself in some deep woods where he's never been before. And here he discovers the circle of trees, each with a door that leads to one of the other holiday worlds. Things of which apparently the denizens of Halloween Town have no knowledge. Instantly drawn to the Christmas door because it's by far the most flashy, Jack steps through the portal and finds himself in Christmas Town. So these holiday worlds, clearly they're more worlds than towns because Jack steps far outside the city limits of Halloween Town before he finds the doors. Jack sings What's This?, one of the film's more iconic numbers for sure, with its amazing patter and infectious energy, as he stalks around, intrigued by the Christmas cheer, something completely foreign to him. Again, apparently none of the inhabitants of these holiday worlds have any idea of the existence of other holidays. Go figure. Now, I've been meaning to rework the planar cosmology of the Keys and Kingdoms world, not just using the D&D version with the Feywild and the Shadowfell and the elemental planes and the astral plane and whatnot. This might be a good place, so soon after making that decision, to start cooking up a substitute cosmology. These holiday worlds. Yeah, it's a good start. Oh, hey, you hear that? Yeah. Future me listening to this, future me who's compiling the canon data from past podcasts, I'm talking to you. You paying attention? Yeah, you better be. And, oh my golly gosh goodness, if I'm not being restricted by D&D 5th edition rules, I no longer have to jump through hoops to make interworld travel, such a triviality in Kingdom Hearts, but way harder to come by in Dungeons & Dragons to make that a thing in Kingdom Butts. I no longer have to come up with the amazingly high-level shit a D&D character would have to pull off for Kingdom Hearts to be a D&D story. Yeah, I need to take another look at Kingdom Butts now that I'm not converting its rules to D&D rules anymore and can make up my own rules. Ugh, man, that's going to make the story so much easier to write and provide us with tons of Keys and Kingdoms lore. I still want to deconstruct the concept and, how it would make sense as, like, a normal fantasy story, but, if I can make up my own rules, not limit myself to the OGL. Gotta get around to doing that. Well, a point of clarification, I guess. Traveling from one world to another is not a triviality in Kingdom Hearts. It's just that pretty much all of the heroes can do it. Not unlike most things in D&D, really. Every D&D hero has hundreds of gold pieces and at least some magical powers, but that's like unimaginable to most of the populace. We just, we never talk about the populace in fantasy stories, just the heroes. Anyway, the last thing Jack sees in this scene is the silhouette of Santa Claus. There are a number of iconic legendary individuals who I want to also exist in the K&K universe. Figured I might as well once I decided to start using the Greek, Egyptian, and Norse pantheons. Merlin I've already talked about, a time-traveling archmage who makes a cameo in every Keys and Kingdoms story in the style of Stan Lee. As for Santa Claus, here's my interpretation. He's going to be a monk. And by monk, I mean that in the D&D sense, as a East Asian style martial artist. You see, Santa Claus is based on the legends about St. Nicholas, the Bishop of Turkey, and a bishop that's it's a little bit like a monk. The pretext is flimsy, but anyway, K&K Santa Claus wields a staff which resembles a giant candy cane, and he owns this massive factory that employs elves, except, high fantasy elves, not like Keebler elves. Are they slaves? Probably. Nobody who owns a factory has good business practices. And K&K Santa Claus is good friends with Jesus Christ, who in the K&K universe is an obscure minor demigod. Meanwhile, Sally returns home to Dr. Finkelstein and resumes her life as his indentured servant, poisoning his lunch so she can make a break for it and explore town, as she does with alarming frequency based on dialogue between the two. Yo, Doc, you want her to quit doing that? Make your own damn lunch and let her wander around. But a character like him can't really conceptualize of doing such things. He made a personal servant, so she's gonna make his lunch and she's gonna stay in the house and she's gonna be grateful because he made her. Granted, that's a statement that gives you slightly more leverage when it's said by someone who literally handcrafted you out of raw materials and brought you to life with dark science, as opposed to when your dad says it. That's just him being shitty. Jack returns to Halloween Town and requests a meeting of the entire town, where he tells them all about Christmas. In the song simply titled Town Meeting Song, he tries to explain the accoutrement and atmosphere, but no one can really grasp the notion of a holiday that's not meant to terrify people. This movie would make a killer Broadway musical. And you know who should play Jack? Fucking Jack Black. I'm dead serious. Jack Black has every bit of the wide-eyed passion of Jack Skellington, and he could totally replicate the quirky singing style that Elfman applies to the role. After the town meeting at least gets the Halloweeners hyped for witnessing Christmas, even if they don't quite get it, Jack starts reading up on the subject and trying to figure out, scientifically, what it is about Christmas that intrigues him so. He borrows some equipment from Dr. Finkelstein, and there's an amusing montage where he examines some Christmas bric-a-brac, his words, and just can't make any sense out of it. During this period of obsession, Sally sends Jack a gift basket. This marks the first time in the film that Jack and Sally actually interact, she having merely been admiring him from the shadows for the first 30 minutes of the movie. Afterwards, Sally has a premonition, a Christmas tree, which becomes wreathed in flames and disintegrates. The film doesn't explain why Sally has a premonition, and when she brings it up to Jack later, he doesn't see anything unusual about it, so put that on the pile of K&K inspirations, I guess. Sapient living ragdolls have premonitions. Okie dokie then. This segment of the film leads us into the song Jack's Obsession. I don't think the film needed the montage and Jack's obsession. The visuals from the montage could have just gone into the song. The montage basically just ate screen time. No. So in the song, Jack sings about how he just can't put his finger on what Christmas really means. Then he decides he's overthinking it. If he wants to experience it, then he's going to be the one to bring Christmas to Earth this year. He gets the town to work on it. One important task goes to Lock, Shock, and Barrel. I'm not sure why these characters are named after an expression which I'm pretty sure is about guns, or why they get the expression wrong by naming the middle one Shock instead of Stock. But whatever, these are some of the best characters in the film. They represent trick-or-treaters. Locke, played by Paul Rubens, is the devil. Shock, played by Catherine O'Hara, is the witch. And Beryl, played by Danny Elfman, is the skeleton. Their physiology suggests that these are more than just costumes. And they have masks, which look just like their faces, which they pop on and off at will. An eerie effect from which Tim Burton drew inspiration from, I believe, a Twilight Zone episode? I don't think I've seen that episode. If so, I never did finish marathoning the Twilight Zone. Our trio here, well, they bring some confusion to the film, in my opinion. They're the servants of Oogie Boogie, and Oogie is poorly explained and poorly integrated into the film. The backstory of Oogie, as revealed in something supplemental outside of the film, perhaps the Oogie's Revenge video game. But his story is that he was once the mascot of a macabre insect-themed holiday that humans don't celebrate anymore. So he immigrated to Halloween Town, where he takes part in their celebrations as the Boogeyman. Questions abound. Oogie lives on the outskirts of town. Why did they let him stay around when, it's implied, he murders and eats people? How did he get 3 native Halloween troublemakers as henchmen? And if he and the henchmen have such a rotten reputation, the mayor is terrified to see the trio, and Jack warns them very sternly to keep Oogie out of it. Why does he recruit them for this job? Anyway, Lock, Shock, and Barrel get the first major musical number that's not sung by Jack or miscellaneous townsfolk about their task, to kidnap Santa Claus, whose name Jack apparently misheard as Sandy Claus at some point. Jack's intention is to bring Santa to Halloween Town for some rest and relaxation while he takes care of Christmas. But instead, the trio sing a song about brutalizing Santa and bringing him back home so Oogie can eat him. Though the song's lyrics make that incredibly ambiguous, and the verse of Oogie's song that explicitly clarifies it was cut from the film, so most viewers are left pretty much in the dark as to what the heck Oogie's evil plan is. He's already a villain with virtually no role in the plot. The least you could do is not obfuscate his motivations. Later, at the town hall, Sally tries to warn Jack about her premonition, but he assures her he has no interest in a Christmas full of smoke and fire and destruction, apparently a little too enthusiastic for it to occur to him that such things can happen by accident, and commissions Sally to be the one who designs his Santa suit. In a fairly pointless but amusing moment, Lock, Shock, and Barrel return to town, having gone through the wrong door and picked up the Easter Bunny instead. Cute. Mumble, something about the Easter Bunny in Keys and Kingdoms. Anything like the Hugh Jackman version of the Easter Bunny? Bit too on the nose, methinks. Meanwhile, there's a scene that foreshadows Dr. Finkelstein building a replacement for Sally, and he's brought some blueprints by his Igor, who is voiced by an uncredited Joe Ranft. Hey, you want to know something weird? Igor? Not a part of the original Frankenstein canon. The basic look and feel of the character comes from a guy named Fritz, who appeared in the 1931 Frankenstein movie, while the name comes from Bela Lugosi's character in that film's sequels. Isn't that just the strangest thing? What would Dr. Frankenstein be without his lisping, hunchbacked assistant? More faithful to the book, apparently. How does something as bizarrely specific as the lisping hunchback who assists an evil scientist become so universal? Universal. Why would you have the idea to add a lisping hunchbacked assistant to a story that didn't have one already? Apparently, Fritz dates back to a stage play adaptation that was made long enough ago that Mary Shelley actually went to see it. Why would you add a hunchback to your play knowing the book's author could? And why to this day is said assistant always named Igor and not Fritz? Those were two different characters. Pop cultural osmosis is weird sometimes, and granted, most of what's weird about it can be traced back to the old Universal horror films. They added weird stuff to Dracula, too. Maybe I should watch the old Universal horror films. I would imagine they'd be very hard to sit through, you know? That would feel a bit like sitting through a slideshow of cliches. Even sitting back and trying to remind myself that everything I'm seeing was like nothing that 1930s audiences had ever seen before. Yeah, on the other hand, I'd be willing to bet every single frame of those films has been done to death in parodies and imitators to the point where I'd be like gleeful to see a whole bunch of stuff I had no idea originated in those films. I remember feeling similar amusement the first time I finally saw Star Wars and realized, wow, Obi-Wan Kenobi speaks entirely in famous quotes. That's pretty wild. I wonder if in the future movies from our generation will also have every second of their existence subjected to endless parody. I feel like they don't make movies that quotable anymore, but on the other hand, I don't really find anything particularly quotable about movies that are endlessly quoted, so, you know, there are memes, of course. There are definitely modern films of which every moment has been made into a meme. Maybe I just don't know quotability when I see it. Anyway, this movie. Dr. Finkelstein makes a mechanical slash skeletal team of reindeer, and we get Making Christmas, which was always my favorite song from the film as a kid. It's just so haunting and scary. The gist of the song is that no one in Halloween Town, not even Jack, really grasped the idea of what makes for a good Christmas gift, and they're making the children of the world some terrifying presents. The highlight of Making Christmas, I think, is the most prominent appearance in the film of a character called the Harlequin Demon, played by Greg Proops, who has a truly horrifying design and, of all the characters Proops voices, the proopsiest of his performances in the film. He's the one who transforms an old rat into a delightful hat, if you are wondering. Look at the guy. As I've said already, all of the minor characters, those that weren't designed by Burton himself, have extremely disturbing designs, but whoever designed the Harlequin Demon and animated him, the way he moves is weird too. They had some disturbed people on staff. Making Christmas also includes a brief interlude that compares Halloween Town's process to what really goes into making Christmas. As Christmas approaches, Lock, Shock, and Barrel finally kidnap Santa. Despite the elaborate plans they described in their song, they just knock on his door and envelop him in a plastic bag when he answers. Jack encourages Santa to take a break. Santa is a bit flabbergasted that they're giving him a vacation that starts on Christmas Eve. Yeah, for realsies, the least you could have done is kidnapped him a couple of weeks earlier before he did all the work. And Jack thinks nothing of the trick-or-treating trio putting him back in the bag and carting him off to their house, where they dump him down the chute, down which they send all of their sacrifices to Oogie Boogie. And here, in this awesome blacklit scene, we meet the man himself, Oogie Boogie, played by famed big-lipped alligator Ken Page, who turns out to be a gigantic burlap sack full of bugs. Oogie introduces himself with his self-titled song, in which he reveals the non-eating Santa parts of his motivation and personality. Subtextually, he's a gambling addict, and with the law of diminishing returns that comes with any addiction, he can only entertain himself by putting other people's lives at risk when he plays his games of chance. Additional subtext rests in Oogie apparently being supernaturally unlucky, as every single time he rolls dice throughout the entire film, he rolls a double one, snake eyes. Like Will Wheaton. It's kind of hard to tell, because Oogie isn't often on screen with any other character, but he's huge. He's about the same height as Jack, and much more massive, obviously, making him, at the time, I think, the largest, heaviest, and most complex stop-motion puppet ever made. A record that, if it existed, was quite handily broken by the Gasha de Kuro from the 2016 Leica animation film Kubo and the Two Strings, whose puppet was over 16 feet tall. Those Leica guys, they take their stop-motion animation heckin' seriously, don't they? I don't know how they do it. I doubt I would survive an hour on a stop-motion set without going apoplectic. At least in other forms of animation, if you get a frame wrong, you can start over where you left off. With stop motion, you're dealing with real physical objects, and if your big dummy hands interfere and knock something out of place, you're screwed. As Jack prepares to set off on his sleigh, Sally sabotages his efforts with some kind of foggy gadget. For no reason other than for Zero, who has a glowing jack-o'-lantern for a nose, can play the role of Rudolph. Pretty sure that moment is from the original Burton short story. I'm pretty sure Zero was in that story. I read it once. I know there were extremely few characters. There was Jack and Santa and one other. I think it was Zero. Despairing over her failure to stop the inevitable disaster, Sally gets her solo, simply titled Sally's Song. Catherine O'Hara isn't a very strong singer, but in what little vocal range she does possess, she's very pretty. That's pretty much true of anyone who sings in a Tim Burton movie. In the song, Sally refers to Jack as a dear friend, but also clearly desires him romantically while believing she's not good enough for him. Which is a very cool character dynamic, you know? Wanting to be with someone, but still seeing value in their friendship if you don't have a shot in the world. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. You know, in my younger days, I've been that guy, the guy who thought that months of friendship made me the front runner, guaranteed romance the moment I asked for it. And offended and having no interest in being that person's friend anymore upon being rejected. So I had the fortune to be on the younger side when I learned it doesn't work that way. The misfortune to learn it from empirical experience. I want to help other guys learn it too. Talking to Sally's romantic feelings for Jack, one has to wonder, can a ragdoll and a skeleton have sex? I mean, not that you need sex to have a fulfilling romantic life, but, sure you do. I'm of the opinion that they totally can. Why? 3 reasons. 1, I think Dr. Finkelstein is just the sort of pervert who would make sure his artificial maidservant had a vagina installed. There are implications that she's meant to be a sex slave in addition to being every other kind of slave. Tellingly, her replacement is explicitly a wife for the doc. Reason number 2, yes, Jack is a skeleton, but spend any amount of time watching him and you'll quickly notice he possesses lips and eyelids. So if he has some fleshy bits, why not all the fleshy bits? There's no reason to think he doesn't have a penis. Sure, you may think those are just stylizations because he's the main character and he needs to be able to emote. I don't care about your behind-the-scenes reasons he has lips and eyelids. The fact is he's got 'em. And 3, Jack and Sally have totally canonically had sex. On the soundtrack album, there's an epilogue, which may or may not be quoting directly from the book, I don't remember, in which Santa Claus narrates a day that he went to visit Jack many years after the events of the film, and in this future, Sally has given birth to a number of Jack's skeletal children who are growing up. I can't really say I know how that works, but it's proof positive that Mr. and Mrs. Skellington have the necessary bits. So Jack starts visiting houses and delivering toys. There's still over 22 minutes of movie left. This is basically the climax. You'd have thought we were closer to the end. Interesting. And so Jack's presents start causing havoc. Some children get terrifying shrunken heads. Most of the gifts are very much alive and very much carnivorous. Most iconic are the sharp-toothed ducky and vampiric doll given to a pair of black children. Good animators. When you set your story in modern-day America, you'd better damn well have some diversity, even if in the background. I always considered more memorable the snarling wreath and the gigantic orange and black snake that devours a Christmas tree. I seem to recall they gave me nightmares. Gave the kids in the movie nightmares, too. I had this movie on VHS when I was like 4 or 5 years old. I guess it wasn't all that obscure before Kingdom Hearts then. Then again, I did have some pretty obscure cheap crap on VHS at the time. Fern Gully 2, Animals of Farthing Wood, Leo the Lion, the Good Times Entertainment version, not the Italian one. Good times indeed. The police get involved, and the military starts shooting at the imposter Santa's sleigh, which is amusing. I like that. In most stories where Santa Claus exists, adults don't believe in him, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Where do they think the presents from Santa that they didn't get came from? So I much prefer the stories where there is no doubt, and adults treat Santa with every bit of the gravitas he deserves. Olive the Other Reindeer is a great example. This film doesn't spend very much time in the mortal world, but I like it when there's a fake Santa on the loose, the police and military get involved and hope to find the real Santa. Good stuff. Sally, meanwhile, tracks down Santa to Oogie's lair and works toward freeing him, but Oogie captures her as well. He takes a big deep breath that sucks Sally and Santa toward him. That's interesting. He never uses a power such as that in Kingdom Hearts. In the Kingdom Hearts games, he's a non-combatant who relies on his death traps. Once you escape those, he's almost completely helpless. Which reminds me, I forgot to talk about Oogie's Keys and Kingdoms equivalent. I'm thinking we take inspiration from the Dungeons & Dragons Larva Mage. Like Oogie, a single being made up of millions of bugs who arrange themselves in a humanoid shape. Now, the Larva Mage is an exceptionally powerful spellcaster, so while I'd want Oogie's equivalent to have similar origins, I want the creature to have a similar flavor to Kingdom Hearts Oogie, an opponent who is only dangerous due to their reliance on traps. But I also better jot down this super breath thing. That's pretty cool. Jack takes far too long to realize that the military are shooting at him. Soon he's hit, and the denizens of Halloween Town, watching in some sort of scrying cauldron, are devastated. Jack returns to consciousness in a graveyard and sings Poor Jack. A pretty underrated number, in my opinion. It seems to be the one song in the movie no one ever talks about, but it's so good. Jack goes through a huge gamut of emotions in this song. First horrified and devastated at how he's ruined Christmas, then briefly angry at how nobody understood what he was trying to do, then absolutely gleeful, admitting that this Christmas was the most fun he's had in years, and now that he's got his mojo back, he's ready to mix things up next Halloween. I've seen this moment compared to something about cultural appropriation. I don't remember how that went. Something about how Jack, caused all sorts of carnage and destruction through his cultural appropriation, but quickly brushes it off because, what the heck, he had fun. It'll be a great story later. Not particularly caring about the suffering he caused. Not cool, bro. Anyway, after Jack calms down from the high of hitting the crescendo of the number, he realizes he's got to make things right with Santa Claus. So he enters a crypt right there in the graveyard. Apparently Halloween Town can be reached through any random graveyard, which is a really cool notion. Adds quite a bit to my Halloween Town is in the Shadowfell interpretation. Jack and Zero race back to Halloween Town, and Jack rescues Sally and Santa from Oogie's cooking pot. There's a final battle in which Jack navigates his way through Oogie's death traps and catches the boogeyman, pulling on a loose thread which rips off Oogie's burlap skin, causing the bugs that make up his body to fall apart into his own cooking pot. Santa meshes the vibrant green earwig implied to represent Oogie's consciousness. Fans call it the brain bug. I don't know how canon that is. Santa berates Jack for what he's done and irritably tells him that of course there's enough time to save Christmas. He's Santa Claus, damn it. Jack realizes how much Sally cares for him, and Lock, Shock, and Barrel lead the mayor to their location, so half-assed redemption, yay! And like any good musical, we get an ending medley. First of This Is Halloween, as everyone cheers Jack's safe return. Santa flies overhead, calls out Happy Halloween, and sends a snowfall to indicate there are no hard feelings. The townsfolk sing a reprise of What's This as they partake in Christmas activities. We see the vampires playing ice hockey with a pumpkin. As originally shot, their hockey puck was the severed head of Tim Burton. Why did they change that? This isn't in my script. I'm having this idea just now. I think severed head of Tim Burton should be some kind of magic item in Keys and Kingdoms. I gotta do it, yeah. Dr. Finkelstein passes through along with the wife he's been working on building throughout the film, who of course looks like himself in drag. Sally sits on the crest of the snow-covered curly hill, and Jack approaches her, singing a reprise of Sally's song, in which the two reciprocate their romantic feelings. The final shot of the film, Jack and Sally kiss, and Zero flies off into the sky, leaving a twinkle behind. That ending shot always really bothered me as a little kid. I was like, what's going on there? Is Zero ascending to heaven? Does this mean Jack will never see him again? I mean, now I understand film language well enough to figure that's just a stylistic touch for the ending, and that if Zero is passing to the other side, that's generally a good thing when a ghost does that. Or, bare minimum, it's bittersweet. So, nothing to say about the credits except that they include a medley of all the film's best songs, as well they should. That was awesome. Worth it. I should have watched it 2 weeks ago like I was supposed to. Why would I procrastinate at this task? I'm an idiot wrapped in a moron. Oh my god, A Nightmare Before Christmas Broadway show was just announced today. Good thing this podcast is 2 weeks later. That comment about how there should be one would have aged poorly. James Monroe Iglehart is organizing it. Ooh, he's good. Is he going to play Oogie? I bet he is. Okay, so it's not exactly a Broadway musical adaptation of the movie because Broadway is staying closed until next June for COVID safety. Very smart decision. I appreciate them making that decision. But it's a benefit concert for lymphoma research. Broadway musical beginning production next June? Maybe? Starring Jack Black? The Nostalgia Critic once compared a bit of miscasting, I can't recall exactly what it was, unfavorably to the idea of casting Jack Black as Jack Skellington, and I was irked because I thought for years that would be a great idea. It wasn't the first moment I noticed Doug Walker has terrible taste, but whatever, it annoyed me. And now, The Three Musketeers. I'm kind of into this story. Not a whole lot, but I've seen a few adaptations, including a amateur high school production and others. What other Three Musketeers adaptations have I seen? I don't know what I'm talking about. But not this one. About a year ago, Dominic Noble, famed critic of books, movies, and the process of converting one to the other, did a retrospective on a large number of famous film adaptations of the Three Musketeers story, in the process making a memorable quip that if this particular movie is based on a book, it's not the Three Musketeers so much as it's the big book of Disney tropes. The man knows what he's talking about and how to colorfully make a point. So I'm not expecting much from the original story. I'm expecting the bit where D'Artagnan runs into the Three Musketeers one by one over the course of a single morning. One by one, they get pissed off at him and challenge him to a duel, and all four of them arrive at the dueling ground together, the three friends surprised that they're all hoping to kill the same dude. Based on what Dom said, all adaptations of the Three Musketeers find that bit indispensable. And after that, I suspect it's going off in its own direction. This should be a fairly easy film to get through. It's not a fantasy or nothing, so unlike Nightmare, I won't have to constantly stop to take notes on a cool supernatural element I can implement in K&K. Which is good because, see, this podcast was supposed to premiere at 7 o'clock on Tuesday, September 29th. I'm trying like hell to set up a pattern here. I've been told the YouTube algorithm likes patterns. I didn't start working on this podcast until Tuesday, September 29th at 6 o'clock. Well after it would be physically impossible to finish it in time. Yes, I'm literally mad with rage at myself, but nothing I can do about it except maybe, get next week's podcast out in time. Like, in time meaning, a week after this one. We open with no Disney logo at all, just a Walt Disney Pictures Presents, and then the man walking down a lonely road logo for Caravan Pictures. Where have I seen that logo before? I don't think I'm familiar with the company. And the movie opens in some watery underground torchlit catacombs? Oh gosh, is this movie going to have supernatural elements, or is it just being covert? We open on our villain, Cardinal Richelieu, played by Tim Curry, torturing people in his dungeon, because I guess that's what the Cardinal does in this one. That was our prologue, and with the opening credits over, we come upon our hero, D'Artagnan, played by Chris O'Donnell. Excellent choice for D'Artagnan. He's doing some dueling with Gerard, played by Paul McGann, a shrill-voiced and hammy character I believe to be unique to the film. He's here defending his sister's honor, D'Artagnan having apparently fooled around with her. D'Artagnan exposits that he wants to be a musketeer like his father before him, who is dead, because Disney characters often have dead parents they didn't have in the book. Their fairy tale characters usually have dead mothers. Adaptations of other sorts of books have dead fathers. Of course, many have both. Okay, we have D'Artagnan in some sort of chase scene. I'm not clear on who's chasing him or why I should find all the slapstick in this chase scene funny. Okay, chase scene over. I think that was supposed to be Gerard's family, also out for the sister's honor thing. And D'Artagnan escapes them. Back at, is it Paris, I guess? We meet, let's see, is that Rochefort, the name of the captain with the eye patch? Fuck, I suddenly know nothing about this story. Anyway, that guy, the eye patch guy, he makes an announcement to the Musketeer organization that they've been disbanded, and all its members demoted to infantrymen, while the Cardinal's personal guards will be defending King Louis XIII. So, you know what a musketeer looks like. The feathery hats with the one flap bent up and the blue tunic thingies. The Cardinals guys have about the same uniform, but red. As far as musketeers go, I assume the swashbuckling swordsman image is derived from this story because you'd think an organization called the Musketeers would wield, muskets. Captain Eyepatch reports to the Cardinal that the Musketeers have lain down their weapons and their uniforms, but that three of them in particular, presumably our eponymous trio, Athos, Porthos, and Aramis, are currently out of town. And okay, Captain Eyepatch is Captain Rochefort, as I thought, played by Michael Wincott. That's why you should always mention a character's name as early and as clearly as possible. Some viewers will want to know that shit. And here's where I started screwing around doing God knows what for an hour or so, and I had to tell myself, watch the damn movie. Okay, back to the movie. Windmill scene. I like windmills. Okay, I see D'Artagnan is still being pursued by Gerard's guys, so he's setting up ambushes and things. Is this going to be the whole movie? That's a peculiar subplot. Okay, I was wrong. It turns out he was ambushing what he thought were bandits who were in pursuit of some ladies. One of the ladies asks his name, and from his name, they know he's a Gascon. What the heck is a Gascon? I heard Dom use that word a few times in his review. Okay, I see dictionary. I see that a Gascon is a person from Gascony and or a boastful person, Gascony having a reputation for such people. Okay, then. The lady is Constance, played by Julie Delpy, and they get a little flirty McFlirtenheimer on each other before Constance goes off on her way. D'Artagnan arrives in Paris and tries to sign up for musketeering, where he meets one of the three, Athos, played by Kiefer Sutherland. Athos is anguished at the abolishment of the Musketeers, combined with D'Artagnan's irritating protests about how he wanted to be a musketeer, leads them to their duel challenge. And then we have another encounter with Gerard, for real this time. For fuck's sake, he is going to be a running gag. While escaping, D'Artagnan spills some stuff on Porthos, played by Oliver Platt, who is fourth billed in the credits. The credits go Aramis, Athos, D'Artagnan, then Porthos. That's awfully random. Porthos claims the sash that D'Artagnan soiled was a gift from the Queen of America, to which D'Artagnan protests there is no such person, and that gets him into another duel 1 hour after the first. And then we come upon Aramis, played by Charlie Sheen, our top-billed actor. Gosh, I've scarcely seen Charlie Sheen in anything other than the self-parody he portrays in the likes of 2.5 Men. It'll be weird to see him actually, act. We come upon him reading the Book of Genesis to a buxom harlot who starts making out with him in the midst of it. But that sounds like Charlie Sheen. All right. The woman's husband, apparently one of the Cardinals guys, comes in with a gun, and Aramis makes a swashbuckling escape, crashing headlong into D'Artagnan as he does so, leading to the third dueling challenge, an hour after the second. Funny how each musketeer specifies a time precisely an hour after the previous one did. Richelieu, meanwhile, comes upon, who is this character? Give me a damn name, movie. Some sort of Austrian royalty who's in an arranged marriage with King Louis. I should know who this character is. I've seen so many movies and plays that adapted this story, and I just rewatched Dom's series on it. Okay, Anne. Queen Anne, played by Gabrielle Anwar. Probably should have guessed the queen part from the fact that she's, married to the king. King Louis himself comes in, and he's a shockingly youthful and foppish fellow, played by Hugh O'Connor. A bit of faithfulness to the book and or history that most earlier adaptations neglected, Louis being a really young guy. Louis is appalled that the Cardinal disbanded the Musketeers so quickly and unceremoniously instead of giving him, the king, a chance to break it to them gently. As Dom puts it, Cardinal Richelieu in this adaptation is basically Cardinal Jafar. The Cardinal and the Captain scheme to nab those famed Three Musketeers in the hopes of getting the King out of the picture ASAP. A platoon of the Cardinal's men come upon Athos and Aramis in a tavern, the pair of them having effortlessly defeated the last platoon of Cardinal's men who came after them. Bodies strewn all around. That's cool when people can do that. I like that imagery. One man against many. Rochefort orders them to surrender their musketeeriness, but Porthos drops a chandelier on his backup. That's a classic bit of swashbuckling fare there. Anything involving a chandelier, really. Athos declares that the three of them will always protect the king, including from the cardinal if need be. Oh, and apparently, digging around on the IMDb, I saw that Paul McGann not only plays Gerard, but also a character called Yussek, who, if the memorable quotes page on the IMDb that nobody reads anymore is accurate, is the red-tunicked guy who appears in this scene. McGann is playing dual roles here. That's interesting. I certainly didn't notice that some rando Cardinal Mook was the same person as Gerard. D'Artagnan shows up for his noon duel with Athos. Porthos and Aramis are surprised that their duels are all with the same dude. And D'Artagnan surprised to see that all three of his opponents are in musketeer garb. Like I said before, this is that indispensable plot element that no adaptation can do without. But, as always, D'Artagnan can't fight them and find out how well he'd do in a duel against them, because the Cardinal's guys turn up and the four of them become friends. This should be exciting. True to form, the boys in red ride up. D'Artagnan joins the trio in fighting off the group, more than willing to fight these anti-musketeer bastards in the aids of the musketeers he so admires. There's some swordplay, which I didn't find especially impressive. The music's pretty good, though, and there's one good bit near the end of the fight where Porthos breaks his opponent's blade with a three-headed dagger, then snares him with a bola when he tries to escape. So Porthos is our pragmatic gadgeteer in this story. I like it. Aramis prays over the bodies of their slain foes, then the three musketeers plan to live out their lives as outlaws, encouraging D'Artagnan to find his way home and give up on his musketeering dream. Instead, D'Artagnan goes after Rochefort. Michael Wincott plays Rochefort with his amazing, deep, growly voice. I love it. I've never heard of this actor before, but I dig it. I did a very poor impression just there. It's so much cooler than that. D'Artagnan finds himself in jail, where Rochefort admires D'Artagnan's well-crafted ancestral sword. D'Artagnan refuses to sell out the three musketeers, so Rochefort upgrades the boys' lodgings from jail to the dungeon. But D'Artagnan escapes the jail keep and sneaks his way out. I do love the set design on this dungeon. It really gives the impression of like a totally different genre. The Cardinal has a meeting with Lady de Winter, played by Rebecca de Mornay. The pair of them threatening each other. D'Artagnan spies on them making the plan. The Cardinal is making an alliance with England in order to dispose of King Louis so that he, the Cardinal, may rule France. De Winter is all for it in ways that I'm sure are explained better in most versions of the story. She is always a villain, right? Rochefort catches D'Artagnan spying and presents him to the Cardinal. D'Artagnan fakes ignorance. Cardinal Richelieu recognizes D'Artagnan's name. A gesture from Rochefort implies that D'Artagnan's dad was the guy who took out Rochefort's eye while defending the king, which jogs Richelieu's memory. D'Artagnan resolutely insists that he doesn't know where the musketeers went, and wouldn't tell Richelieu if he did. Richelieu has to admire a good cliché when he hears one, and in the next scene, D'Artagnan is on the chopping block. This is a really pretty movie. The costumes and the sets are gorgeous, the cinematography is very intimate and personal, and all the actors are in top thespian form, performing almost as if they were playing the roles on a stage or for animation. Not exactly like that, because that would look silly on film, but pretty close. Gerard taunts D'Artagnan from the audience of the beheading, but it turns out Aramis and Porthos have disguised themselves as D'Artagnan's headsmen, while Athos is supplying the getaway carriage. Porthos claims the weapon he used in this scene was a gift from the Tsarina of Tokyo. So I guess that's Porthos's other running gag, claiming he was gifted items from some royal that the place he claims she's from doesn't actually have. Guessing it'll always be a female royal to imply he romanced her. I've seen worse running gags. Post note, not exactly a running gag because it only happens twice. And this is the point where I realized there was no way I was getting this podcast out during the correct week. So I skipped ahead to next week and hope the next podcast could finish the week it's due. Do better next time, that's all you can do. In fact, I think it's too late for this podcast to be released 1 week late. Yep. I suck and I hate myself so fucking much. Yeah, the getaway carriage is the Cardinal's very own. That's a nice touch. So D'Artagnan and the three mosquitoes make their getaway with basically all of the Cardinal's shit, money and weapons and more. The Cardinal puts a big-ass bounty on the quartet, and there's a chase scene with the boys in red pursuing them. As they run, D'Artagnan tells them what he knows, and it's a pretty good piece of exposition. Even though D'Artagnan is telling the Musketeers things we, the audience, just learned, the Musketeers' editorializing is very well written and dramatic. Soon they ditch the carriage and torch it, sending the burning carriage rolling downhill toward their pursuers while they take the horses. That's nice and swashbuckly. The Cardinal makes the release of a bunch of carrier pigeons super intimidating. Sorry I'm pausing for so long between paragraphs. It's very late at night and I'm tired. I think I'm gonna stop recording tonight and pick this up in the morning. I'm back. Sorry, my voice was just exhausted, and no wonder why. We're an hour in already. That's crazy. I must have had a lot more to say about Nightmare than I realized. Okay, it's morning now. Presumably I'll be doing much less tongue stumbling. We find the Musketeers at a bar. Now, Porthos has by far the most personality of the group, with his constant whining and wenching, and his gadgetry in combat, his fanciful storytelling. Aramis has his religious leanings and his extremely poetic way of speaking that sounds super weird coming out of Charlie Sheen, and Athos doesn't really have much. Anyway, Porthos and Aramis teach D'Artagnan how to get laid. I mean, they call it wenching, but still, kind of a sleazy scene for a Disney film, but I can imagine such a scene in K&K. I always keep my fantasy worlds very sex positive. This scene, it isn't a how to pick up girls kind of situation. The women are fully complicit in teaching D'Artagnan things, and also out to have a good time. As the dance floor fires up, D'Artagnan goes to hang out with Athos, who's brooding alone in the corner. I guess Athos does have that. He has brooding. Athos tells an "and that little boy was me" story. You know those stories, the ones that are transparently about the person telling the story. About how he met a woman and married her, only to later find out she was wanted for murder, and turned her in, only to realize too late that he'd acted rashly. Wow, was that backstory in the book? I don't recall. Next morning, they set up on horseback and are beset by cannon fire from a nearby fortress thingy. Action-y. So they split up on their way to... what was going on? They're going to intercept De Winter, who is delivering the letter to the Duke of Buckingham that will seal the Duke's alliance with the Cardinal. Acquiring the letter will prove the Cardinal to be treasonous. That sounds right. It doesn't sound like I'm missing anything. I think the Duke of Buckingham was an actual character in the book, but he doesn't appear in this film. Later, we have Constance giving Queen Anne a bath as they chat about how the former fell in love at first sight with D'Artagnan. I've been told that this movie's version of Constance doesn't have shit to do. The book Constance has shit to do, though for the life of me, I can't remember what that might be. After their conversation, the Cardinal creepily approaches her, yada yada, some manipulations about some crap that Louis isn't actually going through. Tim Curry is doing really good here. I'm so used to thinking he gives it his all in every role, no matter how poor the quality of the project. But I realize at this moment that's because he floors it in every role. In this movie, he's allowing himself some moments to be quietly sinister, and I dig it. Meanwhile, D'Artagnan learns from Athos the truth about his father. His father uncovered an assassination plot and was lured into a trap and murdered by a fellow musketeer. When they find themselves cornered by some gunmen, Athos sends D'Artagnan ahead alone to intercept the messenger. Naturally, Athos proves himself badass enough to beat all the bad guys, and I typed that before I even watched the scene. I just kind of knew that's how it was going to go. Here's a moment in this film much loved by film buffs, sword fighting buffs, and sword fighting in film buffs. King Louis is seen in a fencing lesson, his teacher portrayed by a real-life master swordsman with a long career in choreographing and personally doing the stunt work in movie fight scenes, including the original Star Wars trilogy and, after this film, the Lord of the Rings trilogy. A fellow by the name of Bob Anderson. After Bob's cameo, Louis rather foolishly tells the Cardinal that he has heard rumors about the Cardinal's attempt to overthrow him. The Cardinal plays it off and tells Louis some lies about how the Queen has different intentions from what he's, asked her to do. Playing the King and Queen against each other, it's kind of compelling. Even if I'm a bit too sleepy in the head to follow it right now, that probably means it's really good. On his way to the interception place, D'Artagnan collapses from exhaustion, where Lady de Winter and some evil henchmen find him and sinisterly give him shelter. D'Artagnan awakens to an epic down-blouse shot of de Winter. He panics about his mission, but de Winter insists on keeping him in place while his laundry gets done and he has some dinner. I've been calling her de Winter, but this adaptation follows the lead of every other version of the story, in that Lady de Winter is exclusively referred to as Milady, even in sentences when that doesn't make much sense. It's one of those things, I guess. I'd explain it in a non-Weasley way, but I honestly don't know if there is an actual explanation. She's named Milady. Has been for however many centuries this book has been out. Almost 2. And this is the point where I stopped watching the movie again for like a week. This is the moment where I decided, screw it, the podcast will be exactly 2 weeks late. It's Monday morning now. Completing it by tomorrow night is possible. I probably can't fucking do it. So if he must stay for drinks, D'Artagnan explains what he's here for, unaware that his host is the very spy he's trying to stop. She seduces him and pulls out a dagger she has hidden in her hair while they're kissing, but he stops her just in time, notices a fleur-de-lis branded into her shoulder that, brands her as... an adulterer? No, that's something else. Treasonous, perhaps? Or maybe it's the very brand of Athos's ex-wife? I'm struggling to pay attention. That's not making this one of my better recaps in this series. I apologize. D'Artagnan overpowers de Winter. And she calls upon her bodyguard, Parker, played by Philip Tan, who is an Asian guy. No, I'm not going to do it. People who gripe and nitpick about non-white people appearing in European historical fiction are douchebags. Because historically accurate racism is an ugly topic not worth revisiting in films that are supposed to be fun. Because modern-day actors of color deserve roles in stories not set in the modern day. And because people traveled all the damn time throughout history, there's absolutely no reason to think it outlandish that an evil 17th century French noblewoman has an Asian man as her personal bodyguard. There doesn't have to be a story behind it, just let the guy live his life. And Parker appears to be a martial artist. Well, that was a bit unnecessary. I just defended the guy's casting. Why do you have to make him... Anyway, Parker overpowers D'Artagnan, and Lady de Winter's entourage drags him somewhere it's dark. Looks like a shipyard. In the dead of a foggy night, they board a ship, and I think the unseen guy I heard call for them to board sounded like Porthos. Is this going to be another ambush? It is indeed. All the ship's crew have been killed, and the 3 Musketeers are here to beat up the bad guys and rescue D'Artagnan. Several of de Winter's entourage recognize Porthos as the infamous Porthos the Pirate. How very quirky. I expected a bit more Charlie Sheen in this movie, where Charlie Sheen is the top-billed actor. Quit giving Oliver Platt all the good bits and leaving Charlie to mutter prayers in a posh accent in the background. Porthos duels Parker, who, is not only a martial artist, but also a screaming, blade-twirling... It's kind of embarrassing. They couldn't have made the Asian guy just an ordinary mercenary, same as all the white people. Him having an exotic fighting style from a distant land adds to the appeal of the action scenes because he fights differently from everybody else, but I don't know, this screaming like a barbarian, it's undignified. Also, Parker is not an Asian name. Why didn't they call him Park? That's Korean. Athos and Lady de Winter cross paths, and they recognize each other. Okay, so maybe I wasn't misreading the foreshadowing. She is actually Athos's ex-wife. Cool. Also, her first name is Sabine. I don't know if I've ever heard that name. Is that from the book, or an earlier adaptation, or just this film? Hell if I know. So he's surprised to see her alive. Apparently the Cardinal decided to make her his little spy instead of executing her. And she's the spy they're looking for. When she refuses to give up her information, Athos can't bring himself to shoot her. But she is swiftly captured by, who's this guy? Is this the same guy from that earlier bit at the inn that I forgot to mention? I very nearly missed a bit where a Lord de Winter came looking for Lady de Winter, she having killed his brother. So this guy's either her husband or her brother-in-law, and she killed the other. I'm guessing this is her brother-in-law, and she murdered her husband, because why would she murder her brother-in-law? I shouldn't be this confused. I'm Sage Man. I'm the brains of this operation. I don't get confused during movies. Disney's The Three Musketeers shouldn't be the one that finally trips me up. So they get the treaty from De Winter. As expected, it calls for an alliance between Richelieu and the Duke of Buckingham. No mention of the king. Contingent on a mysterious demonstration of the Cardinal's power. Athos goes to interrogate De Winter to find out what this demonstration might be. He apologizes to her, and she bitterly informs him that she has become the murderer he once accused her of being. Sort of kind of powerful, I dig it. Knowing she will be executed at dawn either way, she refuses to give up the information. At dawn, Aramis says a little prayer for Lady de Winter, and a headsman appears to take her head. At the last second, Athos stops him and begs Sabine for forgiveness. She forgives him, and whispers to him that the Cardinal's display of power will be to assassinate King Louis at the King's own birthday party. She then hurls herself off a cliff into the sea, which shocked me momentarily before I remembered that Dom mentioned that this is the other part of the story that no adaptation ever leaves out. Back in Paris, Richelieu and Rochefort have hired a sniper who will expertly take out the king in spectacular fashion in front of everybody. The Three Musketeers start riding around, leaving little slips of parchment all over the place that read all for one, one for all. All of the ex-musketeers who find these notes are apparently able to derive a lot of instructions from these notes and go around finding secret caches of old musketeer equipment. Okay. Our quartet sneak into Paris for the big event, eyes set on rescuing the king. King Louis and Queen Anne are a bit standoffish with each other after the Cardinal's manipulations. And they have a whispered conversation about their disagreements about the strength of the Cardinal's character, but agree to face whatever comes next head-on as husband and wife. Aww. D'Artagnan spots the sniper, waiting to blast King Louis's head off the moment he presents himself to the people on the balcony. Very good tension here. The violin section is going crazy. Is he going to make it? You can't snipe a guy in a Disney film, right? But D'Artagnan does indeed make it to the rooftop and mess up the sniper's shot, causing a panic everywhere as the Majesties are escorted back inside, and the Three Musketeers must face an entire army of Richelieu's red guys. Yeah, they'll be fine. Oh, no, I was mistaken. The army of ex-musketeers they rustled up, they backed them up, so it's a large-scale battle scene. Red guys versus blue guys. Yeah, I wanted the Three Musketeers to take on all these suckers just by themselves. Meanwhile, on the roof, D'Artagnan gets into hand-to-hand with the sniper. Is the sniper a character from the book? I remember Dom mentioned that in this film a character from the book shows up in the third act more or less out of nowhere. I don't see any character names in the credits that I don't recognize. In fact, I don't see anything here in the cast list at all that might indicate who played the sniper. I don't think that actor is in the credits or on IMDb's list of uncredited roles. I think I'll have to watch that section of that Dom video again when I'm done here to help me fill in some blanks. Yes, I will, and I'll tell you what I find out. Porthos plugs the sniper in the chest with a crossbow to save D'Artagnan's life, and the foursome storm the castle to save the king. Back in the castle, King Louis immediately realizes that the Cardinal arranged this, and the Cardinal confirms it and decides to monologue about it a bit, since everyone in the room right now, other than the King and Queen, well, they're all his red guys, and with the Musketeers storming the castle now, it'll be all too easy to frame them for the regicide. Richelieu has Rochefort go after the king with D'Artagnan's father's sword, the same sword that failed to protect King Louis's father from an assassination. The Musketeers, all of them, not just our heroes, flood the room and stop the assassination. The Cardinal and two of his guys smuggle the King and Queen out of the throne room during the fighting. Aramis tries to prevent the Cardinal from leaving, but the Cardinal shoots him. Ooh, that was a good surprise. We were at no point given reason to think that the cardinal had a gun under all those robes, so it's genuinely shocking. That's good. Meanwhile, Athos decides to duel Rochefort and does poorly. He gets himself stabbed in the arm and then cornered until D'Artagnan swoops in to rescue him, reclaiming his sword in the process. D'Artagnan salutes the wounded Athos, who slinks off to recover, and D-Man gives the sword he'd been using to Rochefort so they can have an honorable final confrontation. Porthos and Athos tend to Aramis, who, as it turns out, was saved from the bullet by the large metal crucifix he was wearing under his clothes. The three musketeers charge together into the cardinal's secret catacombs, splitting up when they realize he could have gone any number of directions. Porthos fights Richelieu's hideously deformed jail keep, impaling him on the spikes of an Iron Maiden. Gruesome, especially since he survives that. Athos and Aramis, meanwhile, don't get solo action sequences. Porthos, you spotlight hogging son of a... Meanwhile, D'Artagnan continues to duel the captain, who fights dirty, unsurprisingly. You know, more good guys should fight dirty. You know who used to fight fair? A lot of people who are dead now. Fighting with honor just gets you killed. I'm not saying break the Geneva Convention or anything, but do what you gotta do to keep the other guy from killing you. I'm just saying. With D'Artagnan disarmed, Rochefort reveals that he personally killed his father. Did D'Artagnan not already get that information in his last scene with Rochefort? Anyway, Constance appears, gives D'Artagnan his sword back, and the captain gets run through. The evil captain dies like a man, admitting D'Artagnan ain't bad at what he does. D'Artagnan is exhausted and injured, but grasps Constance's hand in solidarity. The Musketeers almost catch up to Richelieu, who is taking a boat down the underground waterway along with two red guys and the imprisoned king and queen. The Musketeers call after him that the treasonous treaty never found its way to the Duke of Buckingham, showing it to him as proof, but the cardinal promises to return more powerful than ever before. You know, that particular villainous chestnut of a parting line works a lot better when your power is, magic. Something you can get better at by practicing it in exile. When your power is purely political and you've just been thoroughly stripped of it all, not quite as effective a threat. And so, what just happened? Did Aramis do like a super jump? No, he was the ferryman. He was the one steering the boat, and he was wearing a black hood so Richelieu wouldn't notice. I failed to notice that Aramis wasn't with Porthos and Athos when they were being left behind by the boat. In fact, I could have sworn he was. I'm going back. Okay, yeah, there were only two of them when they made their way to the dock. Fair enough. Aramis takes out the red guys, and King Louis himself personally decks Richelieu in the jaw, knocking him overboard, never to be seen again. King Louis and Queen Anne kiss passionately. Sometime later, our four heroes are brought before King Louis, and the Musketeers properly introduce D'Artagnan to him. He is made a Musketeer, just as he wished. The king makes a big speech about honor and protecting the weak. Oh, it's so good. There's just not enough of that in this world right now, the strong protecting the weak instead of protecting themselves. A good speech about being there for the little guy. It's what's needed right now. D'Artagnan and his three friends take a walk, ready to continue protecting the king. Gerard arrives to demand his fight with D'Artagnan, but flees when the entire Musketeer order races to D'Artagnan's defense. The credits roll over a Musketeer-themed love ballad. Odd choice for a thoroughly non-romance film. I mean, Constance was almost a complete non-entity. Performed by Bryan Adams, Rod Stewart, and Sting. Written and produced by Adams. This really was 93. I heard from Charlie Sheen just today. He tweeted out a very sweet memorial to his former 2.5 Men co-star Conchata Ferrell, who passed away yesterday. Oh god, this song is painfully cheesy. Skip. No, I'm sticking to my rule. I sit through the credits of every film. As it became kind of an annoyance when I hit the late 80s when end credits replaced opening credits. End credits are much less interesting because, people are expected to leave during the end credits. Opening credits are so much cooler, but I guess once the age of the blockbuster hit and film production started featuring so many damn people, putting the whole thing at the beginning of the film would just be an annoyance. So that was Disney's The Three Musketeers. As I expected, no supernatural elements for Keys and Kingdom's influence, but tons of great ideas for swashbuckling action moments, political intrigue, quirky characterization. All of that's just as important, really. Unfaithful to the book? Perhaps. Disney-esque? Not as much as I expected from Dom's assessment. It's quite mature and dark, and genuinely fantastic action film with great dialogue and performances. So yeah, after I finished the film, as I said, I done rewatched that Dom video, just the section on this film. Highlights, apparently the Cardinal Secret Alliance with England was borrowed from the 1935 film adaptation. The backstory involving the assassination of King Louis's father comes not from the book, but from history, for which Dom had to pay Disney some grudging respect. He found Lady de Winter insufficiently cool in this version. She acts cool, but lacks the agency and villainy that most versions of the character do. And he finds it odd that when Lady de Winter and Athos reunite, she calls him Athos, as in the book, Athos, Porthos, and Aramis are code names. Lord de Winter is, in fact, Lady de Winter's brother-in-law, and Dom found it rather ironic that this particular extremely inaccurate adaptation is the only Three Musketeers movie he's seen that didn't cut Lord de Winter out. And okay, the character he remarks appears out of nowhere late in the film. He was, in fact, talking about Lord de Winter. I suspected he might have been. It's very true. You'll recall in the synopsis, I didn't mention Lord de Winter until his second scene because, yeah, he comes super out of left field. And since Dom, like all internet critics who know how to change with the times since the downfall of the nostalgia critic, is much less caustic and obnoxious than he used to be, he says he can't resent the movie for being a really bad adaptation of The Three Musketeers because it's so much fun. That wasn't highlights so much as nearly every word he said in that segment. Okay, Droon segment. Yeah, Droon segment. Well, last time I did the last book of quote-unquote Season 5, I'm still at my mom's. I didn't expect to be here this long, so I only brought the one Droon book, the one that had been tormenting me for 6 months. I asked my aunt to mail me the last 4 books, which she did. Yeah, I won't be covering a book in this episode or the next one. This week I'm just going to do my Season 5 recap. Been a while since I did something like that. Let's go through it. Ugh. So much for thinking I would stop stumbling over words after a good night's sleep. I still flub a lot of words here. So the guest stars of The Secrets of Droon Season 5 are Yuri Lowenthal as a mysterious figure, Marina Sirtis as Ming, Lauren Lopez as Gelna, Katie Lee as Sasha and Aria Curzon as Lena, Josh Groban as a Drew Mars singer, John DiMaggio as Mr. Duppy and James Arnold Taylor as Mr. Beffel, Mark Hamill as Prince Umberto, Seth Green as the amazing Flemke, Taylor Swift as Queen Kia, Elijah Wood as Prince Eric, Jim Belushi as Plundit, Diedrich Bader as Smead, Quentin Flynn as the Troubadour, Danny Trejo as Mudgy, Fred Tatasciore as Bagel, Andrea Martin as an old woman, Kevin Conroy as Captain Talon, Steven Tyler as Duke Bula, Kelly Stables as Feodor, and Peter Dinklage as Mayor Tibble. Nothing to add. I've made some plans for retelling my Droon adaptation fantasy. After I'm done reading the books here on the podcast, I'm going to start a vlog about Droon. It was stupid of me to put so many topics here on the podcast. Nobody who's interested in the Secrets of Droon or the Legend of Drizzt or an in-depth look at the history of Disney films is ever going to know that what they're looking for can be found in a video called a TAPAS and Stuff Productions podcast. Nobody knows what that means. Maybe by starting a Droon vlog series, I can finally reach those Droon fans. If there are any. Again, I think I might be the only one. Lopsided a bit, isn't it? Super long Disney section, super short Droon segment. Finally, we come up on the fanfiction segment. Max the ICBG, part 4 of 4. Thus far, I have not enjoyed Max the ICBG, and I don't think it'll manage to impress me here at the end. But it's only the first part of the 6, right? There's 6. I think there's 6 books in the Max saga, and I know there's some damn good stuff in it, so let's try to find that stuff. Chapter 31. So, Max has just gone into labor when the flock has been captured. That's where we left off. They are chained up in a brightly lit and very clean room. They are informed that whoever captured them intends to just leave them all in here to starve to death, and the fact that one is in labor will not be changing that. Whew, brutal. How do they get out of this one? I'm suddenly having a brainwave. I think I remember this inescapable situation that they get out of. I'm pretty sure it's really stupid. And I think it's related to the fact that there are needles in their spines keeping them completely immobilized, like Tai Lung in Kung Fu Panda. Yes, I think the stupid way they get out of this is related in some way. Well, let me scroll down and find out. Okay, yes, as I suspected, it's Iggy who gets them out. With the super senses granted him by his blindness, he managed to make incredibly subtle movements of his muscles that were able to deactivate the needle thingy. I explained it poorly just now, but no, I was wrong. That wasn't stupid at all. It was very awesome. And the speech Iggy makes about how he's done just the most awesome thing ever and will never get over himself for it, gotta remember that. As they escape, wherever the hell they are, it doesn't say, that's a writing error to be sure, Max wants to give Fang a few last words just in case she doesn't survive labor. That she loves him and what to name the baby, however, she passes out before she can tell him her name idea. Chapter 32, they escape wherever they are into bright sunlight where they are met by the Green Brothers, Balthazar and Maddie. What's up with these guys? I used to put them in like all my fanfics, but they never actually did anything. What was I aiming for? Anyway, they get Max helicoptered to a hospital where the doctors have a bit of trouble dealing with the non-human parts of Max's physiology. Fang is unable to get into the room in time to witness the baby being born, but he finally manages to make his way to Max as the doctors do some kind of emergency thing to the baby to head gum. They're not tense enough about that. Yikes. Max says that the baby girl will be named Airy, A-I-R-Y, after her brother, Ari Batchelder, who died in, I think, the third book in the real series. At the time, I thought Airy and Ari, A-R-I, were pronounced the same. Airy. I think I was wrong. It still works, just not, perfectly. Chapter 33. Max is having what's very obviously a dream. She's in the dark, doesn't remember how she got there, and Jewel is taunting her with the dead bodies of most of the flock. Max claims that you can't kill a bird kid by hanging them from the neck, and Jewel responds by burning them. That's a Myth Adventures reference. I never talk about Myth Adventures anymore. It was one of my earliest big inspirations. I wrote screenplays adapting the first two books when I was 14, 15 years old. The author died in 2008, but by then he'd picked up a writing partner who continued the series and may very well still be doing so to this day. I wouldn't know. I haven't heard about it for so long. You can't really do passive research on a topic as obscure as Myth Adventures. Gotta go hunting for the information yourself. But yeah, it's a highly pun-driven fantasy series that's run since 1978, albeit with one huge gap between publication. Okay, I'm tempted. Active research. Hey, editing me, put up some sort of Myth Adventures related visual aid. Okay, the first Myth Adventures book, Another Fine Myth, was released, as I said, in 1978, and was the first of a 12-book series written by Robert Asprin. The first 10 books in the series were released on a fairly regular schedule, once every 1 to 3 years, from 1978 to 1993, but for whatever reason, there was then a massive gap before the final books came out in 2001 and 2002. Do you hear purring? Kitty came to snuggle on my lap, and she's purring. I can't tell if that's audible in the recording. Anyway, the Myth Adventures, that 12-book series, I know the first 4 books intimately well, having read them many, many times over the course of my childhood and young adulthood. It's been a while, though. Books 5 through 7 I also owned at one point and read fairly often, and I saw book 8 in a bookstore once and read it there. Books 9 and 10 I've never so much as seen. And book 11 was the first after that huge gap in publication. And it was a midquel taking place between books 3 and 4, a way for Asprin to get back in the headspace for the series after whatever the reason for the gap was. I like book 11 a whole lot, but it's way too epic an adventure. Considering it takes place between books 3 and 4, it's just on a such grander scale than anything the characters were really doing back then, or, well, ever since, really. So yeah, it just seems out of character for this series to tackle an adventure this spectacular, and their promise to never speak of the events of the book again to justify the midquelness, little weak. As for book 12, I started reading it once, and I couldn't remotely understand what was going on, so I guess books 9 and 10 are absolutely essential. After Book 12 concluded the original series, Aspirin teamed up with Jody Lynn Nye as a co-writer. Between 2003 and Aspirin's death in 2008, they produced 7 more novels in the series. Since Aspirin's death, 2 more have been released, one in 2013 and one in 2016, written by Nye alone, but based on plans she'd made with Aspirin, and now bearing Aspirin's name above the title for marketing reasons. It looks like a 10th book in Nye's version of the series is on its way at an unknown future date. Well, one of these days I'll have to at least do a complete reread of the original 12 books, see if they're still good, see if making an adaptation of them is still a thing I'd like to do, even if I'm far too old to play the main character now. I picture him starting this series at maybe 14, and then aging a year or so every book. It's not explicit. I could voice him in an animated adaptation, I suppose. And, and after I read the original 12, why not the back 10? Okay, tangent. Back to this story now. Jewel is giving me strong Wiggly vibes here in this dream sequence from Black Friday. Just the mandibles and the blinding white, perfectly round eyes emerging from the shadows. Yeah, I gotta remember to give him that kind of mystique and horror when he appears in Iris. That shouldn't be that hard. He's generally just an extremely horrifying villain right down to the core. I mean, at least I hope he's horrifying. I hope when I introduce him into Iris, people don't immediately spot that he was an edgelord fanfic villain. I write a lot of fanfic, but I don't really read fanfic, so I don't know what the cliches are and if I use them. Anyway, the dream continues, and Max sees Jewel kill Fang and Aerie. Even though Max has never seen Aerie, she pictures a baby version of herself, but with Fang's strikingly dark eyes. Max wakes up in the night in her hospital room to find Fang having squeezed himself into the bed with her. There's some talking, some off-screen sex, some more talking, nothing worth talking about, generally just sweet stuff, yeah. Chapter 34, we return to the big guy, who crawls out of the cave he's been hiding in. Albert and Felicia are there waiting for him. Jewel is going on some huge and horrifying off-screen rampage, killing a bunch of people. Albert and Felicia intend to go into hiding, never to be seen again. The big guy hopes that if they ever return to the world, it's a better place. Nice moment, but I don't think it should happen yet. I think Jewel's activities ought to get a bit more apocalyptic with the whole thing before we have a moment like this. But the big guy decides he has to bring down Jewel. The whole thing is his responsibility after all, kinda. Oh, the kitty left. Chapter 35. The following morning, Max is presented with baby Aerie, whose description fits perfectly with how Max imagined her in her dream. You know what? I'll allow it. You might say that's absurd. I say, it's a baby. It's not much of a stretch at all. The rest of the flock come in and join her in the looking, admiring the baby. Max is capable of breastfeeding. Nobody was sure of that, what with the bird DNA and all. And Aerie has a birth certificate, which Max agrees gives her a better start in life than that of previous bird kids. And Max finally gets the location of the random hospital they happen to stumble upon. Wyoming. Because, I don't know, I like making fun of Wyoming. It borders my native Colorado. It's the same shape as Colorado, and as the old joke goes, there's nobody there. It's ripe for mockery. Chapter 36, enter Keegan. She somehow slips into this hospital room, and the flock are ready to take her down as a traitor, having seen her with Jewel. Keegan insists that she's a friend to Max, and over the course of their conversation, it becomes clear. Keegan is capable of doing absolutely anything. The only limit to her power is her imagination, which I think was established before, but not, in the presence of the canon main characters. Max accepts Keegan's words, sight unseen, unsure if the reason she does so is because of Keegan's reality warping powers. Keegan admits that Max can never really be sure. Keegan is interrogated about this whole omnipotence thing. The characters did accept that as truth a bit too easily. She says she doesn't feel it's her responsibility to make the world a better place, as she's always known that that was Max's destiny. And she doesn't explain how she came to be omnipotent, or, demonstrate it, prove it a little bit, or explain why she appears to be affiliated with Jewel. That's not a very well-structured reveal. It covers just that she's omnipotent and she's on Max's side, and she doesn't elaborate on either. I expected better of myself. Good moment here that I probably wouldn't have noticed if I'd read it on any other day. Keegan claiming that all she's ever wanted to do was hang around and observe. That's a trait taken directly from myself. It remains true to this day. It was the subject of a horrible emotional breakdown I had just last night. I've long seen myself as a sponge, just taking in culture. That's all I really want to do. Maybe create some culture of my own. But capitalist society won't let me be a sponge. I have to be better than a sponge. And constantly, I find myself breaking down in tears because no matter what I do, it's an inescapable truth that I'm not better than a sponge. I'm just not. Chapter 37, so time skip. The flock go on the move again, now accompanied by teeny tiny baby Airy, who I've just realized was also probably partially named after my own sister Aramy, who, let's see, the story premiered in October 2009, which would have made Aramy exactly 1 year old at the time. Maybe that's why I wanted so badly to introduce a baby into the story. Yeah, I had a baby around, providing inspiration. So yeah, the flock know that if Jewel finds them, they're dead, so just like old times, they go on the move. To Denver, where they're scheduled to make a public appearance at a bookstore. Dudes, if you're on the run, don't go where you're scheduled to be. I didn't think that one through. A bookstore in Denver, and they talk about climate change there. I think that might be a reference to the time I went to a book signing of An Inconvenient Truth. Was in line for a very long time, and I got to Al Gore, and he signed my mom's copy of the book. He shook my hand. His very powerful and practiced handshake was a little bit life-changing. Whatever happened to Al Gore? I haven't heard from him in the longest time. Let's see. According to Wikipedia, the last notable thing he did was to meet up with Trump in December of 2016 to discuss climate change. An issue which Ivanka intended to make an important issue for the Trump presidency. Gore is quoted as saying that he searched for common ground with Trump, I'm gonna read between the lines and say he didn't find it, and called the conversation interesting, which, is the word you use when you don't have anything actually positive to say. That sounds about right. Props to Ivanka for hoping her father's presidency would tackle that issue. She definitely deserves credit for wanting that enough to arrange for her dad to meet with Al Gore. Unfortunately, to this very day, Trump continues to regurgitate Big Oil's lies about climate change being anything less than immediate and deadly and needing to be taken care of right friggin' now. My voting ballot, with which I intend to assist in that prick's removal from office, should be on its way. Those of you out there, make sure you vote too. Election day is in 3 weeks, and that doesn't mean you vote 3 weeks from now. It means the deadline to vote is 3 weeks from now. And continuing to stan Al Gore's article. That's not the last noteworthy thing Gore ever did. He did some stuff in 2017 as well. Wikipedia, put this crap in chronological order, would you? So let's see, what happens in this goddamn chapter? Dr. Martinez is there, and so is Jeb. Fucking Jeb, always turning up and continuing to serve as the flock's benefactor, even though Max vehemently does not want him around because she doesn't trust him. Did he do that in the books, or was that just me? Because I've come up with a few other characters who do that, like C. Madge from Whirlwind, another guy intended to appear in the future of Whirlwind. It's very reminiscent, but was that trope derived from canon Jeb, or just me Jeb? The public appearance at the bookstore, they are indeed discussing climate change, and is that where this bit came from? Okay. Max gets her megaphone out and starts talking about how the climate crisis has to be averted if we are ever to get the future depicted in the CBC documentary series, The Future is Wild. Which, as Max states, is like Walking with Dinosaurs, only Canadian instead of British, and about life that may evolve millions of years in the future rather than life that existed millions of years ago. It's a pretty funny bit. Yeah, I'm going to use it in Some Sweet Kind of Vampire, an early episode. Then in the last 2 paragraphs of the chapter, Jewel arrives and kidnaps everyone. Yeah, I moved things along too damn quickly in all my writings until one reader, about 2 years after the writing of this story, started getting on my case about it. Chapter 38, okie dokie, home stretch. Let me guess, they're in a dungeon in which they instantly escape. No, in the beginning of this chapter, they're still in the bookstore. Jewel uses his swirling bladed hands to herd the flock into a big metal box, and still in the first paragraph, several hours pass and the box is opened, and they find themselves in an otherwise empty cargo hold in a moving airplane. Max is terrified of Jewel and really thinks he's going to kill them all. Again, not sure she's seen enough of him yet to be so certain that he can't be defeated. Well, it's a great attitude for a very pessimistic heroine to have once, said villain actually gets enough screen time. Fang is the only one with any faith at this moment. Chapter cliffhanger ending, we get this plane landing, cargo doors opening, and we get some bad guys waiting at no location given because I never set scenes back then. But there's Mr. Chu and Bridget and Keegan, who's keeping a poker face, but Max's hopes get up. Surely Keegan will get them out of there. Chapter 39, the flock are being tortured by Mr. Chu. The guy ended up being very much a throwaway villain in Maximum Ride, never one you could really take seriously. I think he lasted for maybe 2 books. How did they end up killing him? Did they? Did he get his human disguise broken off to reveal a brain in a jar, or am I thinking of someone else? I suppose I ought to reread the Maximum Ride series, including the 9th book, which I haven't read yet, along with Myth Adventures. And Wayside School. I loved those books when I was a kid. A 4th one came out just this year. I gotta do it. So yeah, I'm adding all of those to my reading vlog plans. So Mr. Chu, he's like super angry. Is that a trait of the canonical Mr. Chu? I mean, it must be, or I don't know why Max's narration here in my fic would emphasize it. God, my voice is getting nasally. It's, I ate some pizza and drank some coffee before I began here. You don't want to do that. You don't want to consume dairy products before you record your voice because it gets you all mucusy. Not advisable to do such things before recording what looks like it's probably going to be the longest episode in the history of the podcast. I'm at 1 hour and 42 right now. Look at the backlog for a second. Yeah, hang on a minute. Okay, I'm back. I was right. This is by far the longest episode of the podcast. The runner-up was only 1 hour and 17 minutes. And I'm not even done talking yet. Not the longest video on the whole channel. The Dungeon Siege Part 7 is over 2 hours. Anyway, big giant robot grabs Iggy and Nudge and breaks all their limbs and drops them from a high altitude. Jesus Christ. And, okay, this is a long chapter by this story standards, so Max arranges being alone with Mr. Chu, okay? And it turns out she has weapons hidden in a sheath between her wings. Kataras, Indian push daggers. Vicious weapons known for their ease of use, as all you have to do is throw a punch and ba-boom, massive stab wound. I should have foreshadowed Max having these weapons on her person in some way. But it's awesome that she does. I had completely forgotten that I had Max wielding kataras in what I assumed to be just this one scene, because I feel like that has nothing to do with the fact that kataras are to be the weapon of choice of the title character of Iris, who is herself a ripoff of Max, basically. So Max attacks Mr. Chu with the kataras, stabbing his eyes out and splitting his jaw open. Symbolic of Iggy and Nudge, you see, because Iggy is blind and Nudge never stops talking. That's some morbid-ass symbolism. As unsubtle as it's possible to be, but fucking effective. Mr. Chu manages a ragged, dying monologue after he's done screaming, his last words being, "That's really too bad for you, isn't it?" Very effective. The flock escape wherever the hell they are. Once again, never frickin' described. There's some mourning of Iggy and Nudge. Max expresses that she believes in heaven because they're mutants after all, whose genetic code was rewritten, and that genetic code must have been written in the first place by someone. that's something I did believe at the time. I wasn't a big believer in the Bible, but I believed there had to be a God out there for the complexity of the universe to exist. But no, genetic code is descriptive, not prescriptive. Code is just how we humans interpret the way DNA works, and did not, in fact, have to be written by some Captain God with a big beard. Chapter 40, final chapter, and I semi-keenly remember what this finale entails. I have been waiting for this moment. The 4 now surviving members of the flock, plus the baby, make their way back to the school they were attending in the first 3 quarters of the story. I don't know why they went back there, but when they get there, they find nothing left of the school but a crater. A crater filled with the still preserved dead bodies of all the hundreds of innocent children and teens who attended the school. Flying upward reveals the dead bodies spell out a message. "Give up now, bitches. I will kill you all. Kindest regards, Jewel." And Fang POV this chapter, that's important. He's furious at this carnage. He wants to destroy Jewel. But Max, she has other plans at the moment. She calls Keegan's name. Keegan appears before her. Max informs Keegan she'll never forgive her for letting Nudge and Iggy die, but right now she needs Keegan's help. Asks her if she can make sure no one will ever find her or Aerie. Keegan agrees to do that. Max tells Fang to keep the last 2 members of the flock safe. She's going to hide with the baby until the world is safe, and so she departs. Fang doesn't try to follow her, knowing that even if Keegan wasn't altering reality to keep Max from ever being found by anyone, Max has super flight speed. He'd never catch her anyway. So Fang braces himself to be the new leader of the now very diminished flock, the new defender of the world. And so the story ends, to continue in part 2 of the story, In My Absence, so named because our main character ain't in it. Conclusion to Max the ICBG, part 1 of 6 of the Max saga. Not very good. Even the extremely cool moments were written rather poorly, but I expect more extremely cool moments going forward. They're in the back of my memory. I know they're scattered throughout the rest of this saga, and that I'm gonna find them. Are they better written than the cool moments in this story? I can't say. Don't know. Conclusion to podcast 44 as a whole. Well, it's 2 weeks late, for starters. Yeah. As of this writing, it's 4 hours away from being exactly 2 weeks late. I don't think I can record, edit, export, and upload it in time for it to premiere today at 7 p.m. like it's supposed to. And, look, I know I'm being too hard on myself, but here's the thing. Real artists don't get so distracted as to fall behind schedule. Ever. They continue to produce entertainment every week exactly on time because that's their job. And reminding me that this isn't my job, that I'm not a real content creator, not better. I want this to be what I do with my life. It is not okay for me to be so terrible at it. So, next time for sure, the right time next week. I'm thinking right now that instead of working on it through the entire week, I'll devote all of Monday to doing the podcast and then post it on Tuesday. I don't fucking know if that'll work. No form of my to-do list has ever worked, but last week I cut back a whole lot, and this week I cut back a whole lot more, so who knows, maybe I've finally gotten a manageable one started. Not off to a great start. This was supposed to be the first thing I did today, and it's the end of the day, but maybe I can pick up the pieces. And I'm done, and I really need some tea with honey and lemon and ginger, because this is by far the longest podcast episode, and it's wiped out my voice. Put that on my list. Have a lot of honey lemon ginger tea for when I go back to performing soon.